Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 100 and what is this? 164 of Dial the Gate, the Stargate oral history project. It's taken me 2 years to come up with that line. We have Barry Campbell in this episode, the man who is responsible in essence, for all of the Arctic sequences in Stargate Continuum, and he's going to tell that story to us. But before we get into the thick of this episode, if you enjoy Stargate and you want to see more content like this appearing on YouTube, it would mean a great deal to me if you click that like button. It makes a difference with YouTube's algorithm and will help the show continue to grow its audience. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click the subscribe icon. And giving the bell icon a click will notify you the moment a new video drops, and you'll get my notifications of any last-minute guest changes. And clips from this live stream will be released over the course of the next few weeks on the Dial the Gate and gateworld.net YouTube channels. As this is a live episode, Barry is with us here. So if you are in the chat, you can submit questions to him regarding Stargate Continuum, regarding his time up at the North Pole. He's going to talk about that a little bit more. And his life now as a beekeeper, frankly, which I think is some of the most satisfying and fascinating stuff of all. Mr. Barry Campbell, a dear friend of mine, sir. It is such a pleasure to have you on this show. This is long overdue, and my apologies for that up front. How are you?
I am just great, and I am just so delighted to have heard from you and to be able to do this. So it's not top of mind anymore with me because it's been a while. But once in a while, one of my friends, I'll be out at the winery, and one of my buddies will say to the people we've just sat down with, "Oh, did you know Barry Campbell was in a movie?" And then I get to bring it all back up again. And it's just love it.
Absolutely. What does APLIS stand for?
Applied Physics Laboratory Ice Station. And we called it APLIS because the University of Washington Applied Physics Laboratory was the Navy's hired logistics team. And basically, Arctic Submarine Laboratory, where I worked, would liaison with the Applied Physics Lab and their group of specialists to let them know what we needed in the way of housing, other logistics facilities, snowmobiles, helicopters, whatever. And the Applied Physics Lab would then go out and let the contracts and do all the legwork, because there were only there are only a dozen of us that work at Arctic Sub Lab at that time. And so we didn't have that manpower. So
when is this? What year are we talking?
2007.
Okay.
The ice camp with Stargate was in 2007. The movie came out in 2008, and I then did my last ice camp in 2009 and retired shortly after that. I had been doing ice camps with the Arctic Sub Lab since the 80s.
Wow. Pretty much every year?
Every other year, usually. Just it takes like 15 months minimum to organize an entire 2-month ice camp. So we couldn't do it once a year, just didn't have the time, because we had to do other things too. I mean, supporting the ice camp was only one of the tasks that Arctic Sub Lab did. And in fact, it wasn't even the number one task. Wow. The number one task was providing training and Arctic specialists to ride along on submarines that went to the Arctic all through the year. Okay. So that was our big job.
So you are Navy, right?
Ex-Navy. Yeah, I retired. I retired as a commander, which is the same as a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Stargate world.
Well, I want to say thank you for your service, sir.
Well, it was delightful, and I appreciate the appreciation I get every time I wear my Navy ball cap. So it was a wonderful thing to do. I highly recommend it. But for me, it was a delight.
How did you get involved in being in one of the most inhospitable climates on the face of the planet? You must enjoy the cold.
Well, if you dress for it, the cold is fine. And that's what I learned in the Arctic. You have to be able to dress for it. I was in the Navy for 6.5 years, active duty. got out and got into the reserves, working here and there. I was in Hawaii at the time. And my commanding officer in the reserves found out that I had gone to the Arctic on USS Bluefish in 1975 as a lieutenant. Not many people get to do that. So I was not unique, but I was one of a few that had that experience. And he was friends with the head of operations at the time of Arctic Submarine Laboratory. I was living in Hawaii. Arctic Sub Lab was in San Diego. They wanted to have somebody that worked for them living in Hawaii, working on the commander of the submarine forces staff. The submarine force commander for the Pacific is in Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to have somebody to be there, sort of like their little spy behind the scenes and liaison with, for Arctic matters with the type commander, the submarine commander. So my boss talked to his friend who was director of Arctic Sublab, and the guy flew over and interviewed me. And in about a month, I was not only working for Arctic Sublab, but I was on my first training mission as an Arctic ice pilot or a submarine Arctic operations specialist.
And what year was this?
Oh, I think it was like 85, wow. Something like that. 83, 85, something like that. And then, you know, the rest is history. I lived in Hawaii, worked for Arctic Sublab for 17 years while living in Hawaii. And then the director of operations got promoted to be the second in command at Arctic Sublab, leaving the director of operations spot open. And I and three other of the then ice pilots put our names in the hat, and I was selected to take over as director of operations and moved from Hawaii then to San Diego to work in the lab there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And then
so
you go, yeah.
So in total, from my first mission as a lieutenant on USS Bluefish in 1975, I've been to the actual North Pole 15 different times on 15 different nuclear submarines, including 2 British Royal Navy submarines. So it was in that, and then I was also involved in, and then later on, officer in charge of about a half a dozen or more floating ice stations, ice camps like APLIS in the Arctic.
Does residing in that part of the world for a time change you at all? Change how you perceive the world, change how you perceive yourself in it?
You mean living up at the ice camp?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's like people ask me, how can you possibly be on a submarine? No windows, tight spaces. Doesn't it get claustrophobic? Well, being in the Arctic is not like that. I mean, it's wide open, but you're so busy that if you're really lucky, you can sit back and put your feet up and have a cup of coffee now and then. The way I ran the ice camp was I ran it. I just didn't. I mean, I had lots of good people, and they understood the way I wanted it, and I understood they were capable of doing it and let them do it. But I had my little eyes and ears all the time on what was going on. So I'd wake up at 5 a.m., stop by the mess tent. Nobody else was there yet. Grab a cup of coffee, go over to the command hut, look through the plan for the day, what's going to go on, get debriefed by the overnight watch on what had happened, contact my opposite number back at Prudhoe Bay to find out how things were shaping up there for the day. And I had done 2 hours of work before I even went over and had breakfast. And then the rest of the day was just like that. Very, very often, I had my lunch as a sandwich in my hand with a microphone in the other, talking with, like when APLIS was there in 2007 for the with the Stargate folks came up that year. We had 2 nuclear submarines operating underneath us. We had 2 fixed-wing aircraft going back and forth between Prudhoe Bay and the ice camp. We had 2 helicopters that were local ops at the ice camp and in the surrounding environs. And then every day we'd have 2, 3, 4, 5 field parties leaving the ice camp a mile, 2, 3 miles, whatever, to do whatever they were getting ready to do. And we had a team of under ice divers. And I was overseeing all of that. So if I wasn't, you know, giving instructions to the helicopters or the field parties, I was talking with the divers about they were going to be doing next, or our liaison with the beach about what they should put on the next planes coming out. So it was a constant job. Now, I would work from 5 a.m. to about 11 p.m. And then go to bed and get 6 hours sleep. And I was younger, not a lot, but a little younger. I got by with that. And, my head would hit the pillow and I'd be asleep in half a second and then wake up the next day. But
this was 7 days a week?
7 days a week. And that part of it lasted about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So 7 days a week for about 2 weeks. The 2 weeks before that was a more relaxed time where the camp was building up. And the 2 weeks after that was a more relaxed time where the camp was winding down. But the real stressful time when the submarines were involved was 5 to 11, 7 days a week. And the only way it changed me was it wore me out, but it was the most alive I'd ever been. I mean, the ability, just keeping everything straight in my mind as the day went on and being satisfied at the end of the day that I had done that was just phenomenal. I mean, it was just so rewarding and so self-fulfilling. It was, I didn't mind, losing some sleep.
So it sounds like 6 weeks every 2 years up at the Arctic. Is that about right?
Yeah, about right. Yeah.
And how many months of planning beforehand would go into that? We do the ice camps generally the last 2 weeks in March, all through April, or sometimes the 1st of March to mid-April. We did it then for 2 reasons. One, that's when the sun is starting to stay up for a little bit longer in the north, and we needed the daylight to work on top of the ice. Submarines under the ice can work 24 hours a day. They don't care if it's day, right.
But up the ice, we need daylight, and we'd start off having maybe 10 or 12 hours of daylight to work with. And at the end of the 6 weeks, we'd be up to 14 or 15 or 16 hours of daylight. But when the sun went down and it got dark, first off, man, it gets really cold when the sun goes down. I mean, it goes from, it gets really cold. I guess that's a relative term. The average temperature was probably minus 40. But, it could be minus 50 or minus 60 and then back up to minus 30. So it got cold and then it got dangerous. When it's dark, you can't see what's out there, which means if the ice is always shifting and moving, it might crack a little bit, leave up a place of open water where you used to walk from here to there. There might be a puddle in between that's 12,000 feet deep because the ice broke apart, and you can't see that in the dark. So we don't do that. And then there are, animals up there, notably the polar bear, and you can't see them if it's dark. So we'd stop at dark. Everybody would hunker down and, we get our sleep, get our paperwork done, whatever, and then start the next day early. I don't know what the question was now.
You got it. You got it covered.
Okay.
When, have you always been a sci-fi fan?
Absolutely. My mom and dad were just sci-fi nuts. And it was, we went, back in the day when I was growing up, there weren't DVDs or VCRs or videotapes or anything. If you didn't see it in the theater, you didn't see it. And my mom and dad would take me to the old black and white sci-fi monster movies. And they loved it. Some of my dad's favorite authors were Heinlein and Asimov, and Bradbury and like that. So I grew up loving sci-fi. I started with Stargate. I loved the movie. Just thought it was wonderful. I like James Spader and Kurt, whatever his name is. I loved the movie. And then when I heard that they were going to have a TV series and it was going to star MacGyver, and I loved MacGyver, man, I actually subscribed to Showtime just so I could watch Stargate when it first came out on Showtime for the first couple of years. So yeah, I've always been a sci-fi fan. I'm a Trekkie. I love Trek. And then a lot of the other ones, Fringe and the Warehouse 13 and all the rest of the crazy ones that came and went. I've always been a big fan of all those.
So you decided, it was this 2005, 2006, to do a creation convention in Vancouver
Well,
for Stargate.
I had moved in 2003 to San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
and found out after having lived in Hawaii for 27 years that living in San Diego, you can get in your car and actually drive somewhere else, which I think was, that's a concept. So I found out they were having a Stargate convention up in Anaheim, and that was only like 45 minutes north. So I went to the convention, got in a hotel. I had a chance to meet a few of the stars, and the directors and producers, and so many of the fans, and it was just a wonderful experience. And it was at the end of the convention, they announced that next year's convention was going to be in Vancouver, and they were going to include a set tour. And man, that sold me right there. And I signed up the next day, and I was ready to go to Vancouver. So the next year, and that was probably 05 or so, I went up to Vancouver. And that is where I met N. John Smith, executive producer. They would have signings, autograph sessions here and there. And then they would have stage lectures, the seminar kind of things well, they had one presentation where it was John Smith and two of the directors, Martin Wood and Andy Makita, and they were all on stage together answering questions. And I just loved that part of it. Somebody asked John Smith, it was so funny. He was what they call a line producer.
Yes.
Basically, he was in charge of the money, scheduling, mundane stuff that really has not really much to do with making movies, but more running a business.
Yes.
And somebody asked John Smith, one of the questions he got was, Mr. Smith, you remember an episode Empty Flats where they did this and they did that? Do you know why they did it that way? And John sat there and thought and said, I don't know why they did it that way, but I can tell you what it cost.
That's so, right. That was my part in it. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the questions they got toward the end of their session was, everybody else has a table to sign autographs. How come you guys don't have a table to sign autographs? And they looked over to the guy that was in charge and said, we'll sign if you want us to.
Right.
And so they put a table out in the hall, at the end of the hall, with 3 chairs behind it. And they set those 3 guys down behind, and people could line up in the hall and get their autographs. Well, the next session after theirs was another one I wanted to go to. So I was in the hall, and toward the end of it, I came out, and there were only like 4 or 5 more people left in line for these 3, the two producers and the executive producer, 2 directors and exec. So at that time, I had come up with my own little scheme to be remembered. And I had a picture of myself standing in front of a submarine in the Arctic, and I autographed it. It's 8 by 10. I printed them up on my computer at home. I autographed this picture. And then on the back of it, I had a little sticker that had my name and telephone number and email address on it. And whenever one of the stars would autograph a picture for me, I would give them an autographed picture of me. And so I finally got to the end up to the line. I was practically the last person in line. And because of my personality or whatever, I tend to gravitate toward the person in charge. I just do. I mean, it's that way wherever I go. And John Smith was in the middle. I didn't ignore Martin Wood or Andy Makita, but I stood in front of John Smith, and I handed them each a picture of me after I got them to autograph a picture. And John says, well, what is this? And I said, well, this is me. It's what I do for a living. I work for the U.S. Navy, and I go to the Arctic on submarines. And John, he said, I've been trying to get to the Arctic for like 10 years on those Russian icebreakers or something. I want to go to the North Pole. Can you get me up to the North Pole? And I think he was just, making conversation and being, nice.
Right.
And I said, well, Mr. Smith, I'm pretty sure I can't get you to the North Pole, but I might be able to get you to an ice camp a couple of 100 miles south of the North Pole. Well, he beamed and handed me a business card and said, now, if you're serious, you give me a call. So I didn't know if I was serious or not. Now, I'm the officer in charge of the camp, but it's somebody above my pay grade that decides who gets to go and what's going to happen. They tell me, and then I make it happen. So I came back and talked to my boss at Arctic Sublab, told him the thing. My boss, very good friend of mine. We were more like friends than co-workers. He was a sci-fi fan, but had never got into Stargate. He said, "Now that Stargate thing," he said, "Now that's Air Force, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, the Air Force special ops are the guys that run the Stargate in Cheyenne Mountain and stuff." He says, all right. He said, "Well, what do you have in mind?" And I said, "Well, I'd kind of like to see if we can get maybe 2 or 3 of the on-screen people to come up and maybe get them to agree to sign autographs or take pictures when we have the submarine surface through the ice. And that would be kind of like a morale thing for the crew, instead of a boondoggle for the Stargate people, who are Canadian, by the way." And he said, "Well, I guess if we can sell it as something good for the crew, we might be able to sell it to Big Navy. Let me see what I can do." So he starts liaisoning them with the people in Washington, D.C., and I let it go. I talked to John Smith. Well, I talked after Jeff said, "Yeah, we might be able to do it." I got my business card out and I composed just a glorious email to John Smith about what we could do and stuff like that. And I sent it off. And then about 15 seconds later, I get the return bing that says, "This email address is not valid." And I thought, well, but I am not shy. And there was a phone number on the card.
Correct. So and he did give it to you.
Yeah, I picked up the phone and dialed, and ring, ring, ring. "Stargate, can I help you?" And I said, "Yes. Yes, this is Barry Campbell. I met Mr. Smith at a convention a few weeks ago, and I wonder if I might be able to talk with him for, Well, the secretary, who I learned to love, is his gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And of course, here is a crazy fan that met Mr. Smith at a convention that now wants to talk to him on the phone. I don't think so." So she said, "Well, Mr. Smith is not in his office right now. I think he's down on the set." I said, "Well, okay." He was probably in the office. I said, "Okay, well, can I leave a message for him? Or when will he be back?" "Oh, it should be 2 or 3 hours, I said, "Well, can I leave a message in case he comes back earlier?" "Yeah, he doesn't really return calls like that, but I'll take your name and number." So she took my name and number. Well, 3 minutes later, ring, ring, ring. "Hey, Barry, it's John Smith." And that's how we started. I told him what was going on a little bit. So we were looking at doing maybe 2 or 3 of the on-screen personalities and a couple of support people to come up for one night, just to fly up, stay there overnight, and then fly back to Prudhoe Bay the next day. And we could do that. And then a week or 2 or a couple weeks later, Jeff calls me into his office, my boss. And he said, "Barry, I was just watching a show on TV called E-Ring. You remember that show?"
Me?
It was about the E-Ring. E-Ring. It was about the Pentagon. And the E-Ring, they have A, B, C, and D and E-Rings in the Pentagon. Okay. And it was a military show, but it's centered in the Pentagon.
Never and he
said, I was watching this show, and it's got Army and Navy and Air Force and Marines. They're all interacting in the Pentagon. He said, "I wonder if the Stargate people would be interested in filming in the Arctic and not just coming up for a visit. The Navy could support that, And I said, "Well, I don't know a lot about it, but my understanding is that if they leave their studio and go 2 blocks away, they take like 7 semi-trailers full of stuff and 150 people to go, on a remote shoot. And of course, we can't support anything like that." He said, "No, we can't." He said, "Well, why don't you call them up and see what kind of if they could do a skeleton crew and come up and do filming for, a day or 2. So I called John back and I told him, and he said, "Man, I don't know." He said, "We take a lot of people when we go." I said, "We could probably do maybe 15 people, maybe 5,000 pounds of gear for, 2 or 3 days. If you could, get any, maybe you could get background scenery or anything, then we might be able to do that." He said, "Well, let me think about it." Then I get called back into Jeff's office again. And he said, "I was talking to Big Navy, and they said that we would be able to probably let them film a submarine surfacing through the ice. And we might be able to let them get on the submarine and film too while they're up there." And I said, "Man, these guys are going all out. Let me talk to John." So I called John. He says, "I don't know, Barry. Let me see." So here's the story I heard because I wasn't there, but John tells me he went into Martin Wood's office. No, Brad Wright. He went into Brad Wright's office. The big,
Yep.
the head guy in charge. And he says, Brad, I met this guy at a convention, and he works for the U.S. Navy and the submarine force, and he can get us up to the Arctic and film on and in a submarine coming through the ice in the Arctic. What do you think? And Brad says, John, I don't know if you've watched the show, but we use this Stargate to go to other planets. He said, now we could probably use the Arctic as maybe an ice planet or something like that, but then when a nuclear submarine, a U.S. nuclear submarine comes bursting up through the ice, that would kind of blow the illusion, don't you think? And John said, well, yeah, but you're the guy in charge. You're the brains. You're the inspiration behind this thing. Figure it out. And then he left. And so Brad figured it out. And it turned out after 2 years of working back and forth, and after Brad was able to come up with the script, we got 18 people from the Stargate company up at the camp for 7 days. And they, because the Navy wasn't in the business of supporting production companies, we charged them for the food they were going to eat, for the huts we had to build, for helicopter time, all the rest of that stuff. And John tells me later, man, he said that was a bargain. He said, wow. You could have charged us 5 times that, we would have paid it. But we just charged them what it cost. We just charged them what it cost. And anyway, it was and then we made it happen then. So it was 2 years after I met John that we got him up to an ice camp.
Man, that is just that is mind-blowing. And it is the one of the cooler sequences in all of Continuum. It's one of the reasons that everyone was so excited to see it, because I don't think that had ever been shot before, at least with that level of sophistication, a submarine breaking through the ice at the North Pole.
I think there probably were some Navy newsreels back in the day that showed it, but nothing for public consumption, real public consumption, and nothing certainly a commercial enterprise. So it was new. It was fun for me too. I have been officer in charge for a half a dozen of these camps. I have participated on the submarine in about 400 surfacings through the ice. So you don't really get to see much except the inside of the submarine as we burst up through. I have been the officer in charge at an ice camp when submarines surfaced, but they surface miles, 2-3 miles away from the command hut. And that's kind of like where I lived, in the command hut. So I had never seen a submarine surface through the ice live. And David, I retired never having seen that in person. I didn't see that. I didn't see the one on Stargate Continuum because I was back at the command hut working logistics, getting people to and from the submarine. The next time we had a camp 2 years later, I made it a point to be at a surfacing site when a submarine surfaced. And got out to the surfacing site, and it was huge. The surfacing site that Alexandria used for the movie was only maybe 100 yards wide and a half a mile long. As they had to orient themselves, in the feature just right so they could come up. Was not an easy thing to do. It took them 3 tries. But 2 years later, when we had a big, what they call a polinia, thin ice, 2 or 3 feet thick, that was probably a mile in diameter. It was huge. So we went out on sort of like the edge of, a few hundred yards from shore, cut a big X in the ice with shovels so the upper-looking camera from the submarine could see it. They could orient themselves under it, and that's where we wanted them to surface. And we were going to use that big spot for many surfacing, so we're going to move that X around, the different places. So I'm sitting on an ice ridge, freezing my butt literally, watching the X, and I'm getting feedback from the guys that are at the X, and they're having the underwater phone and stuff. They okay, Mr. Campbell, they're on their way up now. Should be and I'm watching them crash. They come through way over there. I didn't see it at all. I was looking at the X. They missed it by half a mile.
Oh gosh.
And that was the only chance I had. And so I've never actually seen that.
Well, they did, like you said, for Continuum, they did it on the third try. It thankfully worked, but you're dealing with major currents, right? Not to
There's
mention this huge piece of machinery. You can't just pull up and pull up to the spot and then rise.
If you're real lucky, that works that way, but that's like 1 out of 80 times. These guys, they knew they were doing this for filming. They wanted to hit the X. And the joke at the ice camps was that the safest place to be when a submarine is surfacing is at the center of that X, because they'll never hit it. They'll always be off.
And you have to be prepared to drop everything and run if you feel something beneath you.
Right. So
no joke.
Yeah.
So.
We were all standing, or they were all standing on the thick ice, 5 foot thick. And then there was this 100 yards of like 2 foot thick ice that the submarine was going to come in. The X is out in front. And there was a wicked left to right current, as they had to line up with the long way in the Polinia, because the short way wasn't big enough for them to come up in. Mm-hmm. So but there was a sideways current pushing them one way, and they would get under the X and start coming up, and then they would drift, and now they're under that thick ice. And they tried it twice, and the captain was determined he was going to make this happen. So he talked to the ice pilot on board, one of the guys that worked for me, and said, "How do we make this happen?" And the guy said, "Well, Captain, we can make it happen, but it's going to take some cojones here. Yeah. We're going to have to start surfacing under the thick ice, knowing that when we finally get there, we'll be under the X. We'll have to, time it. We know how fast we're drifting. We've done it twice." Captain said, "Okay, let's give it a shot." And by golly, they did, and it worked. And on that third time, 5 hours after they started, they surfaced through the ice. The camera crew, the cameras, the actors, all of my guys were out there for 5 or 6 hours in 40 below, waiting for these guys to come up.
And now we had a break inside.
Yeah, we had a warming hut.
Oh, so there was something. Okay.
Yeah, we had an 8x8x8 warming hut with a propane heater in it that people could get in and warm up. Okay. And they would, when they knew there was going to be another hour, they would take the cameras in there and all that stuff. So, but they spent a lot of time just out there looking and waiting and watching. So, but it happened and it worked. And there's an underwater telephone the submarine has on board. And then we had a portable underwater telephone at the site with a little hydrophone sticking through the ice so we could talk to the submarine. And they would tell us in code that they were hovering, that they were on their way up, that there was 50 more feet or whatever. And that's how the people on ice know when to expect them. And when they broke through the ice, the underwater telephone hydrophone for the submarine is on the bottom, so it's still underwater. They can still talk to us in it. And the captain's voice comes over the underwater telephone and says, "That was for Hollywood."
Wow. Yeah, that's so cool. The camp itself, I want to show your pictures during this part of the discussion. Tell us, what these things were made of, what your typical personnel was, how you assembled it, the logistics behind it. Plywood is mainly what I remember, and I was like,
"Yeah,
plywood?
It's mostly plywood." It's the huts are 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 8 feet tall, made out of 4x8 sheets of plywood, but they're prefabbed, and the plywood is 2 sheets of 1/4 inch plywood with 1 inch of styrofoam insulation between. So they're pretty well insulated. And they sit on a platform that's 3/4 inch plywood raised up about 6 inches from the ice that it's sitting on. So you're not right on the ice, but you're darn near. And then the ceiling and the walls are all insulated with the styrofoam. Wow. Each of the huts then, if it was a sleeping hut, we'd have three sets of bunk beds. So 6 people could live in that hut. It's 8 foot wide, 20 feet long, 8 feet tall. And there would be a kerosene heater inside the hut to warm it up. They had a door, and the door had a prefab door, pre-hung door that they put in, all measured out. And it had a about a 12-inch by 12-inch plexiglass window in it, so you could look out through the door. But that really is the only window that was in the hut. It was all, otherwise it was all just plywood. And we had, and then we'd have as many huts as we needed to overnight the max number of people we expected to have at the camp. We'd have a command hut made essentially the same way, but it was 2 or 3 times the size, because that's where we had all the microphones and communications equipment and all the other things we needed to run the camp. Somewhere away from the center of the camp, we would have a big double insulated Quonset hut style tent that was that housed diesel generators. And the generators then made the electricity, which we would just string on pieces of, long 2x4s for the wiring to go from place to place in the camp. So there was electricity in every hut. We had a fluorescent, 4-foot fluorescent light in there, plus an outlet that you could use to charge up your computer or whatever you needed. We also had then a bigger hut that we had set aside for the divers. I can talk about divers later, for their equipment and for them to sleep and work. And then we had a super big double insulated Quonset style tent that was the mess tent. And it would seat 24 people at a time. Attached to the end of it, the one end was the door. The opposite end was attached to more of that insulated plywood where we built the kitchen facilities. We would bring up 3 cooks, a head cook and 2 helpers, and then bring up all the food we needed. And it was all, pretty much frozen food. And we had the biggest freezer in the world right outside the back door. But we also would bring up vegetables and milk and things that didn't get frozen. And we would put shelving, metal shelving inside that hut. And the bottom shelf was the coldest. And as you went up, it got warmer as it went up. So we could keep refrigerated goods in the hut, because it was sort of inside the hut. It was outside the hut. It was freezer temperature. Inside the hut, it was like refrigerator temperature.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So I tell people we worked in the freezer and we ate in the refrigerator.
Jeez.
And the cooks were used to cooking for large groups. I mean, they were either cruise ship experienced or something like that. They ordered all the food. Meals were just wonderful. They attempted to get 5,000 calories per day into every person at the camp. Most of those calories were used to keep yourself warm. And they had 3 full meals a day. We'd also have outhouses. It would be 4 foot by 4 foot, 8 foot tall, uninsulated, unlit, unheated, with a door, and in the center of it would be a 2 foot square box that's about toilet height.
Yeah.
Whatever, 17 inches.
I'm showing it now.
Okay.
And lots of toilet paper on the side. You weren't going to run out anytime soon in this particular shot.
No. And nailed to the top of that was a toilet seat, but it was offset toward the one end of that box so that you wouldn't have to scoot all the way back into the center of the box. But that was also good because the box was lined with a double lining of super heavy garbage bags, those big black leaf bags.
Yes.
And so when you use the bathroom, it went into the leaf bag, and it would start creating kind of a little pyramid under the center of the toilet seat. And when the pyramid got to the point where it was getting uncomfortably close, you would just take the box and rotate it 180 degrees, take the lid and change it back. So now you've got a clean a spot with no big pyramid that you could fill back up again. And then when the box got full, you just take the lid off, and which had the toilet seat on it, grab up the sides of the garbage bag, twist them up, tie them up, set them outside the hut where it would freeze almost instantly. And then once a day, our camp gorillas, which were the divers and other guys that would take care of the housekeeping at the camp, they'd come by on a snowmobile and pick them all up and take them out to the dump, and we'd burn them up that way. For the men, we had a peephole, and I think there's a picture of that too.
Yep.
And we'd have at least 2 of them, sometimes 3, at the outskirts of the camp, and it usually would be a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot box, maybe 2 feet high, with a 2 by 2 pole set in the center of it. Now, once in a while, we'd have a box without a pole, and the box with the pole, that's where for guys who are, they like to aim. Some guys need to have something to aim at. And then the other box was like free form. You didn't have to, you just had to get it in the box. And by the end of 6 weeks, with the ones with the poles in them, it looked like a giant yellow popsicle upside down.
I can't imagine. I understand the huts, but I would think that part of me would freeze off, doing the other one.
Well, when you train, it takes some training. You go out, you put your back to the wind. That's important.
Yeah.
Now you get back to the wind, and then you dig down through 12 layers of clothing.
Yeah.
And get yourself situated. Now, putting your back to the wind does not always put your back to the camp.
Of course. So
many mornings I would be out there, and with my free hand, I would wave to the nice lady cooks as they walked by, saying, "Good morning. It's nice to see you guys," and off they would march. So it was the real test of masculinity was going in the middle of the night. And as I got older doing these camps, those bathroom visits through the middle of the night got more frequent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we train, you get up, you get your camp booties on, and you throw your parka on, you get your flashlight, you look out through the window in the door to make sure there's not a bear in sight. No bear, open the door, look all around with your flashlight, march straight to the thing, back to the wind, but, keeping looking around with your flashlight, do your business, and then get back to your hut. That was, it sounds worse than it was. It was cold, but there's a certain peace in the middle of the night. The only sound is those generators in that tent way, way, way away. Otherwise, it's a little bit of wind, and, there's more stars than you can count. All the different northern constellations you're used to are just blazing. And then generally, at least at some point during the camp, we'd get some northern lights showing up. And so getting up in the middle of the night to have to pee was sometimes a treat, because for those guys that didn't have to get up, they'd miss the lights. I was mentioning that at breakfast one morning while the Stargate group was there. Now we had Amanda and 5 other women in a hut by themselves. And that was a couple of the camera assistants, makeup, costumes, those folks. They had brought some women up. We told them that was fine. And I had mentioned that the Northern Lights were really great last night. And so Amanda, she went over to the command hut at one point and asked that they wake up the woman's hut if the Northern Lights were out, because we always had 2 people on watch all through the night, the officer and his assistant. The assistant would wander the camp once an hour just to make sure there weren't any cracks appearing, or, check for fire or whatever, just a safety thing. And he's the guy that would say, "Oh yeah, the Northern Lights are out." So he'd go and rap on the door of the women's hut, and they came up and he rapped on it, and they all got up, and they were up for 2 or 3 hours watching, taking pictures and enjoying the lights.
That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about your speech at Stargate to let them know what they were in for when they were going up there? And this is the story where Christopher Judge excused himself.
Yes. We normally, when we have people come to the ice camp, we'll give them a orientation, safety, and survival training, which lasts 4 or 5 hours. And this is for anybody that's never been to the Arctic before at one of our camps. So we'd either go to their place if there were a lot of them, or they'd come to San Diego and we'd train them at our place. And I was in charge of the training because I was going to be the officer in charge, and nobody else, frankly, wanted to do it. So I did it. And so we told the Stargate folks that they were going to have some orientation before they got up there for their own sake. So Mike Hacking, who was my opposite number at Prudhoe Bay, he and I were going up early, which we always went up a couple weeks early. And on the way up to Alaska, we stopped at Vancouver and rented a car and put all our stuff in it and went over to Bridge Studios, and up in their conference room where they do the table reads and all that kind of stuff, they set it up for us to do our lecture. And everybody that was going to go up to the camp showed up that day. It was a Saturday, and we gave a 5-hour orientation. So the first part's orientation, second part is safety, and the last part's survival. And it's more and more dramatic the longer you go through it. The only person that really wasn't in attendance was Richard Dean Anderson, and they assured me that he would be given all the appropriate stuff to read and look at, which I don't think he ever did. But we took care of him anyway. And I was telling, in this safety and survival section, I said, you guys go on away from the studio on location for a lot of times, doing different things out in the desert, out in the forest. And, it's sane, and it's not in a studio, but it's not really that, there's not really danger involved unless you're stupid. In the Arctic, it's not like that. There's actual danger of death in the Arctic, and you have to be aware of that and respect it because it's true. A crack can open up. You can fall into the ice. Once you fall in, unless there's somebody there to pull you out, you're not getting out.
2 people died during production around the same time. The film is dedicated to them.
They were actually on a submarine. We can talk about that in a minute if you want. But at the camp, there is actual danger. There's danger of frostbite. You have to be aware of what frostbite looks like, what it feels like. You have to look out for your buddy, because if your ears and nose are starting to get frostbite, you won't know it because they go numb. You have to keep your eyes on your buddy to say, hey, listen, you're getting some frostbite, and rub your ears or do this, do something we have to warm you back up. And polar bears don't have any natural enemies, and they're very curious, and they can outrun a man. So we always watch out for them every time we have an aircraft up. But when they leave, they circle the camp looking for bears, whether it's a helicopter or a plane. When they arrive back, they do a circle first to find out. So we're always on the lookout. But we have gotten up in the morning and found that there was a polar bear sniffing around the butt end of the helicopter one day. You can see his big old footprints out there. So there are dangers. Well, and it's not so much to frighten them, but just to make them aware, make them be aware and don't take it casually. Every time you're out of your hut, you have to be aware. Keep your head on a swivel and remember all these things. You can smile and joke and laugh and have a good time, but you have to keep your wits about you. Well, at the end of this, Christopher Judge was there, and also Rachel Luttrell was there. They were planning on going up. Rachel bowed out because it turned out later that she was pregnant at the time, and so she bowed out and then later told us she was pregnant. Christopher bowed out because he told somebody that I looked around the room and realized that the only person at the table that was the same color as a seal, which is the polar bear's favorite food, was me. So I decided not to go.
I have made fun of him ever since for this.
Yeah.
Oh man. What a trip. And I mean, you've got to be proud of the finished product, how Brad worked you guys in.
Yeah. There was Brad was brilliant in the way he got, the Navy involved. And when we wrote the outline for the script, he called me and I talked to my boss, and my boss went to Big Navy and said, they've got it written so the Navy rescues the Air Force. Well, that sealed the deal,
Right.
So, Brad is brilliant. But there was one point where it turned out that, Michael Shanks and Ben Browder and Amanda, they all had come back through the gate and gotten onto the boat, right? And Continuum. And then when they left the boat to trek across the Arctic, they left Michael behind. And so that boat sequence and them sliding down the ice outside the boat. That was all in studio.
Mm-hmm.
The inside of the boat and sliding down. All the rest of the Arctic stuff was actually in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
But I got a call from Brad saying, I've just learned that now we did all this filming in March because that's when we have to have our ice camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't going to start production until May. So everybody was on contract for May. And so they had to go out and scrounge cameramen and everybody else, to get them under contract for this one, 7-day shoot in March. And when they went to Michael Shanks, he had already signed up to do 3 episodes of 24 at that time. So he couldn't go to the Arctic. So Brad called me to say, I've got to write him out of the trek across the Arctic part. And let's figure this out. So after about a half an hour going back and forth, we came up with the step your foot into the ice and freeze your foot part. And that would keep him from legitimately being able to make the trek across the Arctic. And that's why he got a frozen foot and ended up losing his leg in there.
Wow.
Yeah. Because he couldn't make that March shoot.
Yeah. Well, that's contracts, when you get something else going on. Yeah. But what an experience. I've got some fan questions for you.
Okay.
So it looks like Gate Gabbers asked, did all the huts have names? I noticed Luxor stenciled on the side with one with the Stargate banner on it.
We typically at each camp, we pick a theme and name each hut for the theme. And the theme picked this year was Las Vegas hotels. Sometimes it's cartoon characters. Sometimes it's famous explorers.
Yeah.
Whatever it was. But this year it was Las Vegas hotels. So every hut was named after a Las Vegas hotel.
Raj Luthra, did you give a tour of the station to the cast and crew? I'm sure that had a part to play in once you guys were up there, showing everything around to everybody, because they're going to be living there for a week. So.
Oh yeah, well, when they, I gave them the orientation, and then when they arrive on the aircraft, I met every person that came to the camp as officer in charge. Some guys didn't do that. I always did. Escorted them back to the mess tent, got them fixed up with a cup of coffee or hot chocolate, and then gave them their on-site orientation then, which was about a half an hour. Tell them about the outhouses and the peepholes and what time dinner is and what to wear to dinner and what not to wear and safety and where the extent of the camp, don't go beyond this and all that stuff. And in fact, there were 2 things that we did at the camp. One of the rules we had was cooks don't wash dishes. That was a rule. So we had a whiteboard up, and people would sign up to do dishes after breakfast, lunch, and dinner throughout the like the next week. And I had told the Stargate cast and crew that would be expected of them. And when they got up there, they were only going to be there a week. The entire week was already filled up with volunteers to do dishes. So they just got up, got the eraser, started erasing names and putting their own names in. And everybody did dishes, I think except Richard. But everybody, John Smith and his wife, Amanda, they all did dishes at one point. They felt like they had to do that to be part of the camp. And the other thing we always had to do was we set the camp up miles and miles and miles away from the shore on an ice floe. This particular ice floe was about 5 feet thick and about a mile in diameter, but it had a bunch of bumps, a bunch of little ridges in it. And those are that's the older ice. When the sea ice freezes, it's salt water. So the ice has got a high salt content. But every year that it doesn't melt in the summer, that some of that salt leaches back into the water. So after 3 or 4 or 5 years, what you're left with is pure salt water, not salt-free ice, freshwater ice. And that's where the big humps and stuff are. So we would go out, sweep the ice or the snow off the top of it, get a pickaxe and pick at that, taste it, see if it was salty or not. And that would be our source of drinking water, cooking water, water to clean with for the camp. And so everybody had the responsibility to go out and help mine ice because everybody had drinking water. Yeah. So I'd get up and, I didn't mine ice. I was a little busy, but I'd walk to the command hut and I would see Grizz and Ben and somebody else had a snowmobile and pickaxes and they were heading out to the ice mine to mine ice. and they took their part just like everybody. When I told, I was a big Stargate fan, and I had been involved with, set tours and stuff, so I had seen some of it.
Yeah.
And I realized what professionals these folks really are. And when I told my guys that we were going to have these Hollywood types up at the camp for a week, they were just, Mr. Campbell, what the hell are you thinking? We're going to have to babysit. We're not going to have any time to do our jobs. It's going to be hell. I can't believe you even agreed to anything like that. Well, about 3 hours after they had arrived, my crew had realized that, hey, these guys are professionals. These guys are workers. These guys are ready and able to do what needs to be done. And the first meal was, the Stargate people sitting at their table and the APLIS people sitting at theirs. But by breakfast the next morning, it was all mixed up. Everybody was sitting with everybody else, and it was all one big crew and my guys had so much respect for them. They would give them anything they asked for, and they were so delighted. I mean, they would say, "Now, you think you can do this?" "Oh, hell yeah!" That my guys wanted to do it. They didn't want to ask, but it was just such a pleasure watching it all come together like that.
Those people pull their weight, when it's appropriate, and even when it's not, it's like, where can I help? So
that's right.
So that's just who they are. Lockwatcher said, "We appreciate what you did for Stargate, but with the exception of Continuum, what's your favorite episode of the series?"
The 200th episode. That's I don't have to think about that. Those puppets, that was great.
That's great. Yes, I remember sitting in Brad's office and he said, "We're making puppets. We're doing marionettes." I'm like, I'd seen Team America, and I was like, okay, this is gonna be crazy.
Yeah. And after that, I guess Wormhole Extreme. That was another favorite.
Absolutely. General.
So many. I mean, the one where Teal'c and O'Neill keep going back in Groundhog's Day, doing the Groundhog's Day thing.
Window of Opportunity.
Yeah, that was.
It's a riot.
So there were so many.
So General Maximus wants to say, can I just say from one fan to another, thank you so much for everything you did and the phenomenal and truly unique contribution you made to Stargate.
Man, I did it for me, guy. I'm glad everybody else enjoyed it, but it was just it's purely selfish and it worked, man, and it just worked out.
So you are, and Lockwatcher also says, because you're a beekeeper, have you made any mead yet?
No, but I'm now beekeeping with my buddy down the road. There's a winery a half a mile from my house, and I met him at the winery one day. Turns out he's an ex-Navy P-3 pilot, where I'm an ex-Navy submariner. So he was the guy looking for the submarine, and I was the guy on the submarine trying not to get found. But we hit it off just fine. He has a big orchard, so we've got a couple of beehives at his place. So I'm a beekeeper with him. We have 4 hives between us, and we share the responsibilities. It's about 3.5 miles between us. He makes wine and mead, so I don't have to make it myself. Mike makes it for me.
And then you're the honey guy.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a few hours from you, sir, and I am going to go up and film some of this to share with everybody later this year. I want to see the bees.
I'd love to have you. I got a bee suit that'll fit you, I'm sure, and we'll get out there and pop the top on one of the hives and let you meet some bees.
Cannot wait. We will make it a part of Dial the Gate for sure, because that's always fascinated me. So, Barry, this has been a tremendous treat. I regret not having you on the show sooner. I've always wanted to wait for the right time, and it means so much to me for you to retell this story in such wonderful detail again. So it was great to have you,
David. I've got another hour of stuff to talk about. So if you want to do it again,
let's have you back. Let's have you back.
We can do it. I've got some behind the scenes
I want to talk about retrieving the torpedoes. I mean, that was always just brilliant.
We can talk about that.
So,
I mean, I can talk about when Richard Dean Anderson, got to say cut, yeah, all kind of stuff. So
let's
there's
have
lots
you back.
Love to.
Yes, and the film was dedicated to the memory of Continuum was dedicated to Paul McCann and Anthony Huntrod. They were the ones who lost their lives during an accident under the ice cap on the HMS Tireless during production of
just before the Stargate people arrived.
Oh man,
they had an explosion on board, and unfortunately, 2 of the sailors lost their lives, and 1 was seriously injured. The folks at the ice camp jumped into emergency mode and did some amazing rescue work to get the injured sailor out of the boat and up to Anchorage for surgery. So it was a tense time, and it was a tragedy. Tireless went ahead and was called home after that, and Alexandria stayed to complete her mission, and so we were able to continue with. I got to call Brad Wright right away, and he was, are we going to come or not? And I talked to Big Navy, and they said, yeah, let them come. We might as well keep on going, so we did.
Right. Well, thank you again for making this all possible with being a Stargate fan. It's where your fandom can lead to some surprising things and some really cool rewards. So, and you know what, I'll have you back for another hour. We'll finish the round of stories.
I'd love to anytime. Just let me know.
Thank you, sir.
All the rest of you guys out there, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. If you've heard it before, I hope you heard something different. If you hadn't heard it before, well, now you know.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up on this, and I'll be in touch with you real soon, okay?
All right, so I'm done?
Yes, sir. Be well, my friend.
You too.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha to you. Barry Campbell, everyone. His stories are always so cool, and I'm always learning something new that I haven't heard before. So thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Dial the Gate. We have a pretty packed schedule now. Let me just put it this way. So Elena Huffman is going to be joining us tomorrow, which is a Monday, January the 23rd at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So she's going to be discussing her time on Stargate Universe as TJ. February the 4th at 10 a.m. I have David McNally, who played Hanno, most notably in Korai, and he also came back as Simon in Demons, and also returned in season 2 of Atlantis. Jonathan Glassner, his new show, The Ark, is launching Wednesday, February the 1st. I talked with him yesterday. So a piece of that is actually going to be debuting tonight when I get off work onto Dial the Gate. And then we will be having his full interview to discuss The Ark and more of his time on Stargate SG-1. That's going to be posted on February the 4th at noon after David McNally. Then February the 11th at noon, we have James Tishner, visual effects producer and writer from Stargate SG-1. This is a long overdue interview. I apologize to everyone. And then Anna Galvin at 4 p.m. Pacific time, a little bit later on February the 11th, discussing her 3 different roles on Stargate SG-1, Atlantis, and Universe. Followed by February the 18th, we're really scheduling pretty far out there now. Bonnie Bartlett, she'll be back to discuss more Linnea on her episode of Stargate SG-1 and her new book just out now, Middle of the Rainbow. So if you go to dialthegate.com, you can click on Middle of the Rainbow here, and it will take you to Amazon where you can purchase her book. So if you want to discuss her story, her life story, Middle of the Rainbow, how a wife, mother, and daughter managed to find herself and win 2 Emmys. This came out earlier this year, so we're going to have her middle of February on the 18th. And I suggest you go and get her book so you can ask her about her story when she comes on to discuss it with us, and more of her time in Hollywood. My thanks to my team. I cannot make this show possible without them. My producer, Linda Gate-Gabber Fury, has really stepped up and helped me get these interviews booked. I didn't know how much I was really needing pretty much a full-time producer almost until we started cranking things out this year, as well as my moderating team, Summer, Tracy, Jeremy Reese, and Anthony, and a big tremendous thanks to Frederick Marcoux at Concepts Web for keeping our site up and running. My name is David Reed for the Dial of the Gate. We're going to be switching over to Wormhole Extremists now to watch 2 more episodes of SG-1, Enigma and Solitudes. That's youtube.com/wormhole extremists. We'll see you on the other side.